Shalom. Welcome to the Chai Center. Welcome to the Chai Academy. So, we're having phone and internet problems. So if I'm looking in the wrong place, it's because I'm recording from my phone. Welcome. We have been discussing over the past month, perhaps, Genesis. So we started Genesis chapter 1, then chapter 2, and chapter 3. So we're holding Genesis chapter 3, and we've been discussing the sin, the original sin, and the consequences of the original sin. And we've uncovered some fascinating things about what transpired. We've uncovered that the sin perhaps wasn't such a sin, and literally it was, but there's more to the story. And that's true, by the way, with the entire Torah. The entire Torah. There is, excuse me, there is much more to the story than it is generally portrayed. If you do message, I don't know if I can see it. I have no idea. I'm once again doing this from my phone. I'm doing this from my phone, and it's extremely difficult to navigate. So let's just hi Zach, I see a wave. So let's begin. So we've been discussing that Adam and Eve got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and they had to now work for a living, bread of shame. They were given everything. They were given on a silver platter, and they did absolutely nothing to earn it. And we've discussed other concepts as well. But now let's take a look after they were kicked out. We're still in chapter 3. After they were kicked out, God placed angels to protect them, fiery angels to make sure that Adam and Eve don't come running back into the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was just an incredible place where everything grew miraculously, and God would not wanted them to work for a living. So God kicked them out. And to assure they don't come back, he placed these angels. And the Torah tells us that these angels had a Cherub hamithapechet. It had a swirling sword. It had a sword that was swirling and basically cut down anybody. If you think of Darth Vader, blessed memory, by the way, the actor passed away. So you think of the swirling sword. So too the swirling sword of God placed the angels. But what's fascinating is these angels that prohibited Adam and Eve from entering into the Garden of Eden. The Torah calls them cherubim, cherubs. That there were these cherubs that God placed, bouncers, if you will, and with a swirling sword to cut down anybody that tries to come in. There's only one other place where it's written that God had the other place where it's written about cherubs. And where was that? That was the cherubs placed upon the ark. So the ark had the tablets, the broken tablets, the fixed tablets. There was a gold and wood ark, solid gold and wood, and then solid gold, etc. Placed on top of it was this cherubim. Cherubs, a boy cherub and a girl cherub, and they had wings, and they were angelic, and they were little children, and face of children, boy child, a girl child, and they had wings, and their wings touched each other's wing above their heads, and they were cherubs. When we think of cherubs, we think of angelic little kids, pure, etc., etc. So that's the other places mentioned cherubs. So here's the question, and it's a great question. One place it mentions cherubs are angelic kids who are placed over the 10 the broken tablets and the fixed tablets, the code of morality, what Judaism had to offer the world. The other time he mentions cherubs were with these bouncers, these brutes, these angelic thugs that had a sword to cut you down. Cherub, exactly the same name. So what is a cherub? What is a cherub, right? Is a cherub an angel? Or is a cherub a thug? Great question. Which one is it? An angel or a thug? Eileen, have any answers to that? Susan? Anybody? Which is the correct version of the cherub? So the answer is that a cherub could be either. A cherub can either be a thug, or a cherub can be your angelic kid. Your kid can either be a thug that goes around, trouble, or your cherub can be an angel with incredible values. That's amazing. It could be one and the same. Do you know the difference between one's child being a thug and the other child being with Jewish values and angelic Torah values? One is outside of the Garden of Eden, has no interest in going into the Garden of Eden. And one of them is attached in the holies of holies, attached to the Ten Commandments. It all depends on how that child was brought up or dragged up. It all depends. Was that child dragged up and brought up with no values? Or was that child brought up with values? You see, rearing children as part of the curse that Eve got was it's going to be difficult. And they're going to test you. And they're going to see what type of... Can you hear me, Lenny? Can you hear me? I did put it on the Torah chat on Waze. At least I thought I did. So, but can you hear me? That's an important thing. So one can. So one will be tested by their child. They're going to test your moxie. They're going to test your mettle. They're going to be completely. And Lenny, can you place it on the Minion chat and can place it wherever you can if the announcement didn't go through? We lost everything here. We lost phones. We lost internet. That's why I'm using my phone. So they're going to test you. Your children are going to test you, right? The question is how you respond. How you respond, and this is the crux of the issue. They'll either be angelic or they'll be thugs. Now, generally, we'll get to the if they test you and your response is a negative response. If they test you and your response is not trying to teach them, not trying to make them better, but your response is one out of anger. Your response is one out of frustration, and all you're doing is venting. You can push them into thuggery. If your response is one of love, and one is you're still the parent, and therefore they're not your peer. We're talking about teenage kids. We're not talking about young kids. So when your teenage kid tells you something, and they press your buttons, and you respond in kind negatively, it's an incredibly difficult not to respond in kind. But if you do respond in kind, it becomes a vicious cycle, and they will in turn respond to you in kind. So the first rule of being is you want to make sure you have the potential to have an angelic kid. Not always is it your fault, and I can prove that to you in a moment, but you want to have potential that your child having good values is practice what you preach. So if your kid gets furious at you and tells you to get lost or drop dead or whatever it may be, and you respond, no, you drop dead, you get out of my house, you this and that and the other, right? Your child has the potential to be a cherub that's outside of the Garden of Eden with a sword in his hand, ready to fight. If your response to them is, I'm sorry you feel this way, but as a parent, I cannot let you drink and drive. As a parent, no, you can drive. Of course you can drive. Just not right now. I love you too much. I respect you too much to allow you to do this, that, and the other. Then you are attaching, you are sharing, you are inculcating values with your kid. So that's why there's two different cherubs. And the children are based on the parent's response. Now, there are clearly sometimes when you do everything you can, and your child will still be the first kind of cherub mentioned in Genesis chapter 3, where the child is a thug. Right? And you've done everything right, or you've done most things right. Hey, Greer, most things right. You've done everything you can, but your child is still rebellious in nature. So Jacob had a brother. They were brought up in the same house. Esau was rebellious. It can't be helped. There's sometimes you're going to have a rebellious child. Sometimes it's not your fault. But if you notice that Isaac and Rebekah still loved their kid. Isaac didn't give up on his kid Esau. Right? Jacob, while he had to run away from him for fear he was going to be killed, he still, at some point of time, came back because it's my brother. Blood is thicker than water. Family, it's my family. It's my own flesh and blood. So yes, there are times that your child can be a cherub, mentioned in Genesis chapter 3, where is a thug, but that's not necessarily your fault. The question is, how do you react to that thuggery? But before we get there, we have to make sure that we do our best to be good and proper parenting, and that we never lose our cool with our kids, and we always try and bring them up properly with proper values. So it's two things. We try and inculcate them to be a mensch. And if they fight you on being a mensch, you never use the word I hate you. You never use the word I disown you as a parent. The child may use it, but as a parent may not use it. You never, ever use the term, get out of my house, right? And for those that don't have teenagers, right, you're going to be tested. You'll see when your kid becomes a teenager. It's unbelievable. But you don't succumb to that type of parenting, because you want to do your best to make sure your kid is a cherub of the second kind with proper values. But now, what if a child is a rebel? What if your child doesn't listen to anything you do, and your child is trouble, smokes weed, and worse, right? What do you do? What do you do? So, generally speaking, in the approach of old was tough love. Tough love. And there is a place for that. Tough love. Where your child slams the door too often, you take off the door. Your child is disrupting your household. You lay down heavy rules. But what happens if you tried everything and your child is still a rebel? So old tough love will tell you kick him out. Okay, now you're gonna have to live by grandma. Now you're gonna have to live by Aunt Shelley. Now you're gonna have to find a place to live, right? And that is true. That's how it used to be. However, there's if we look at the great sages of today, the great sages of today, and many sages of yesteryear, they would tell you that if your child is a rebel, within and without, not a selective rebel. A selective rebel is you still got to remain very tough. But a rebel where they're a rebel in the house, they're a rebel in the street, they're a rebel at school, and nobody can control them, right? Then the only way you can bring them back, because they're a rebel, and the only way you can bring them back is with love. There is only one way to bring them back, and that's with love. So and the Rebbe speaks about it. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says that a child, every person, is internally good. The question is, how can you tap into their eternal goodness? Right? And that's definitely not done by shouting and yelling. So if your child is a regular, typical child that has some bad days and has some good days, you have to make sure they don't slip. You have to make sure they say, listen, your teacher called me, you missed homework, right? And this is an anomaly, and this is, that's not you. What's going on? No, you have to do your homework. Okay, so you can't do your homework tonight. You're going to have to do it on Sunday. But I have a son. You'll finish your homework and then you'll go. But if your child is a rebel, that's a typical child missing homework. That's a typical child getting in trouble once in a while. We're talking about a child that gets in trouble a lot. A child that doesn't listen to authority, rejects authority. A child that's told there is a school uniform and you cannot wear, spaghetti straps, and they wear spaghetti straps. A child that's told that you're not allowed to bring this and that to school, and they bring it to school. A child that you're told that you have to do this, that, and the other, and the child tells you get lost. So that child who's a rebel, who's you already have a child that's the cherubim, a cherub from Genesis chapter 3, as opposed to the cherub from Genesis, from Exodus, where it's attached to the holy ark and it's within the ark. This is a child on the outside of Gan Eden, on the outside of the Garden of Eden. This child, you have to make sure that you don't damage further. This child needs more love than anything else. And that means, and there's a name for it, by the way. There's a name for it. It's called kip. It's a kid in pain. For whatever reason, that kid is in so much pain that they've decided to rebel against your values. It could be religious values. It doesn't have to be religious values. So, and they don't act the norm. So they'll come to a wedding, in jeans and a ripped t-shirt. That child is not to be yelled at that wedding, but that child is to be embraced. That child is you go over to that child while everybody's going, and you're the parent of that child. Your job is to put your arm around that child and walk him down the aisle and sit in your seat. Your job is to dance with that child, right? Because that child needs to see that you love him or her above all else. If your child is in the middle of being a rebel, then you got to try and stop it. But once that ship has sunk, you don't want to damage that child any further. Now, why does a child become a rebel? Right? So why does a child? So generally speaking, a child becomes a rebel because of trauma. Some form of trauma that's happened to that child. Right? And if you listen to some specialists out there, I think it was Dr. Laura Hill, who would tell you that 80% of trauma is sexual trauma. Somebody didn't do the right thing. Somebody didn't do the right thing. You may never know. But it doesn't only have to be sexual trauma. It could be trauma. It could be bullying from their peers. It could be a teacher was a bully, and instead of being, it was the opposite, the antithetical to a teacher's pet, when the child could do no wrong, this child could do no right. Right? So that child you don't want to emotionally damage anymore. That child has to be loved more, right? You want to do whatever you can to repair the wounds, the emotional wounds this child has, and you will not repair it by creating additional emotional wounds. So you have a child, right? There's a real rebel, and that child comes into the house, and that child is smoking. That child is smoking, right? Yeah, you want to put rules? Put rules. I wouldn't, because there's a reason why that child is 16 and smoking. Right? I wouldn't put rules. I would just, okay, smoke. You know, I would not. I just would not, because what I've seen, what I've learned, you know, in my life as a rabbi, in my life as a parent, is that a child who's rebellious in nature, or not in nature, a child that's rebellious in not nature, but has become rebellious, that child is really, really hurting, really hurting. And the best thing you can do is just give it love. So there's two things we do to a child that's rebellious. One is we give that child gifts, right? We make that child feel good. The child, you know, likes a certain sports jersey. You buy the sports jersey, and you gift bomb this child. You give this child a jersey in front of all the other kids, and you say, "Look, we got for you this," and you give the child, you know, you just extra love to this child. You can even now tell the other kids that you're trying to love bomb this kid. So you gift bomb this child, right? And the gift bombs could be small, they could be large, right? Bottom line is it needs love. And the second thing we do is we never condemn them. They may say something so outrageous to you, you don't answer back. Right? They may say something so hurtful to you, you don't answer back. They're in trauma. They're in deep, deep trauma. And for you to answer them back, it just keeps them in trauma. So what you try and do is just show them love, right? Something that I've seen with a child that's a rebel because of trauma, in other words, they changed, is the parents write them a letter to say that they will never judge them. That I'm not going to judge you as a person. You're my child, and nothing is going to come in the way of you and my child. There's a lot more to talk about this subject, but this is from the sages. You know, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, said that if you have a child that has been gone astray from Judaism, which you think the Baal Shem Tov, right? The Baal Shem Tov says that you have to love this child. Love, 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 and love again. And once in 50 years should you should do anything but love. Once in 50 years, he writes. But otherwise, you just got to love and love and love this child. Because this child is bothered, is hurt, is in pain, is sick from pain. And therefore, you as a parent have to make sure to protect that child from further pain. And once again, it's a cherub. It can either be a cherub with thuggery or a cherub and angelic. But either way, it's your cherub. It's your cherub. Another commentary I saw about the sword, that the child is holding a sword and is swiveling it around to make sure Adam and Eve doesn't come in, is is what I've read, which is interesting, is that the child growing up, as a parent, you have to make sure that your child does not latch on to the sword of modernity. Not everything that comes out does your child need. So Michael Jordan introduces a pair of sneakers. Doesn't have to be first. PlayStation just issued a PlayStation 5 or whatever it is, PlayStation 6, I don't know the count. They don't have to be first. They don't have to be in every single thing. Yeah, of course, Hanukkah, you get this nice and the other. But this is pre-Rebel, by the way. Once they're post-Rebel, maybe get them the PlayStation. But pre-Rebel, you don't want them to latch on to every nonsense that's out there and feed their ego and feed their desire to have the biggest and the best. You don't have to. You don't have to. But once your child is a rebel, it all changes. Any questions? So you may always ask me a question at rabbi@thechaicenter.com. You can ask a question on Facebook. To see past classes on these topics in Genesis chapter 1, 2, 3, and other hundreds of topics, feel free to go to thechaicenter.com/academy. If you enjoyed this class, feel free to share it. God bless.